Hello, folks. I have the pleasure of doing the oral history project with Mr. Bryan Ottone. Bryan was born on the 25th of April, 1950, joined LGMA, or back then IMM, in 1980. You retired in 2013, and a short synopsis of your background has you as Vice President of the Queensland branch from 87 to 88, President of the Southeast Queensland branch 88 to 89, Senior Vice President of the Queensland branch 2000 to 2001, President of the Queensland branch 01 to 02. You have a Fellowship of Local Government Managers Australia, and you were awarded the Life Membership in 2002. Extraordinary background, Bryan.
Thank you. And what wasn't mentioned there, I was President of the North Queensland branch. I just can't remember the exact year, but in addition, yes.
Fantastic. That's good additional context there. So let's jump straight into it, Bryan. Can you give us a brief history of your local government career?
Yes, okay. So I was approached by the Shire Clerk of Atherton Shire Council in 1971 and advised that there was a great career in local government if I was prepared to study, obtain qualifications and to become a Shire Clerk, as well as work hard and learn. And prior to that, I was in the banking system and was enjoying that role. However, the Shire Clerk convinced me to join the council. So I joined there in November 1971 as a clerical officer. Mm-hmm. And after a few years, I thought I'd better start studying. And back then you had to do basically 3/4 of a degree. And then you had to apply for your local government clerk certificate through the Department of Local Government, and you had to give, they needed to know what experience you had in conducting meetings and what have you. And so the year that I finished my qualifications was 1979. And just before that year, before my qualifications were complete, Atherton Shire Council called for a Deputy Shire Clerk due to the resignation of a long-serving Deputy Shire Clerk. And at the same time, I'd made application for Shire Clerk in Herberton Shire. So on a Thursday, late in November, the Atherton Shire Council offered me the position of Deputy Shire Clerk, and the following day, Herberton Shire Council phoned me and offered me the position of Shire Clerk in Herberton. So that was an interesting period, particularly with...
Which one did you take?
I took Herberton.
You took Herberton, okay.
Well, they actually appointed me as deputy, and I took Herberton. So I said to the then Shire Clerk, John Hooper, that I'd make sure I left with a clean slate, left nothing behind, and I commenced Herberton Shire in 1980. So I did 4, and you can imagine I'd really gone from a 3IC of a council to a Shire Clerk in one step, so I had a lot of learning to do. So you could say Herberton Shire Council was probably a real grounding period for me in the learning phase of my career. So I spent 4 years, wonderful years in Herberton Shire, and I always had my eye on Mulgrave Shire as a place maybe to end up at. So I said how to get there. So Nanango Shire called applications, and I went down to Nanango just to view the place and that. And at the time, Tarong Power Station was being built, and there was a lot of development opportunities with town planning and what have you. So I made application there and was successful. So I had 5 wonderful years again in Nanango Shire from 84 to 89, and Mulgrave Shire called for either an assistant shire clerk or an accountant. So I made application for the assistant shire clerk's role and was interviewed and was offered the appointment. So I commenced in Mulgrave Shire in 1979, and as assistant shire clerk, and a couple of years later there was they did a restructure, and I was offered the position of Director of Corporate Services there. And I had a really good time and really enjoyed Mulgrave Shire. And then the amalgamation came along in 1995 of Cairns City and Mulgrave Shire, and I was appointed there as the Director of Corporate Services in 95 for about a year. And after a restructure, they decided to go from 6 departments to 3. I was offered the position of General Manager, Admin and Finance stroke Deputy CEO. So I held that position until I resigned in 2001 and commenced at Emerald Shire Council. Again, I put in for Emerald Shire Council, which was advertised, and it had 2 long-serving shire clerks before me there. And the one immediately before me was a renowned shire clerk in the name of Keith Purdy. And I knew that Emerald Shire was a really progressive shire and with industry as well. So I was lucky to be offered the appointment there, and I commenced there in 2001, and things were going rosily and I really enjoying it. And then of course the BD government decided they were going to amalgamate mass councils. So in our case, they were looking at putting 4 together, and I was offered the position of CEO of the Local Transition Committee in late 2007, which I took for the planning of the amalgamation and or initial planning. And after the elections in 2008, the council offered me the position of CEO, so of the Central Highlands Regional Council, the new name for the council. And I stayed there from 2008 and retired in 2013. So my last role was CEO of the Central Highlands Regional Council. That's a snapshot.
That is an extraordinary snapshot. I imagine there are plenty of tall tales throughout those years.
Oh, there are many.
We'll try and get to some of those, and I can attest to your reputation in the Emerald and surroundings, because I had the honour of being at Central Highlands Regional Council. Oh, I'm going to get the years wrong here. 2017, 18, and 19 as General Manager of Communities. So your name was certainly ringing around the halls of the admin building there and across the community. So very cool. Bryan, can you tell me the list of role models that you've had throughout your career?
Yeah, well, probably the two main ones were the former Shire Clerk of Atherton Shire, Bill Mills, who became the CEO at Mulgrave Shire. Mm-hmm. So he appointed me, and then I ended up as his, you could say, his 2IC some years later, and before the amalgamation of Cairns and Mulgrave, because he retired at that once the amalgamation went ahead. And my former CEO from the amalgamated Cairns Council, Terry Moore, PSM.
Terry Moore.
They were both excellent role models for me. Yeah.
Anything specific from either of them that stands out as a, really important characteristic for you and why you chose them as role models?
Yeah, well, Bill Mills, of course, encouraged me to join the council.
Yep.
And he had a vacancy came from a fellow who joined there, and Bill encouraged him to get his local government clerk certificate, and he was appointed as the deputy of the then Landsborough Shire Council, mm-hmm. which became Caloundra City Council with that vacancy. So Bill was encouraged people to study and learn and encourage them to better their career. So before I'd finished my qualifications in Atherton Shire, Bill, I believe he was poached to Mulgrave Shire Council as the CEO, and Atherton appointed, he was a young fellow at the time, because we were all young then, of John Hooper from Banana Shire, and all indications were that John, John will stay there for quite a while. So when Herberton Shire came up at the end of that year, Bill encouraged me to put in for it.
Yeah.
And so that was probably but the other things during that time, he certainly encouraged me to sit in at council meetings, and one particular day for half a meeting, he left the meeting and said, right, you take over, you can record what's going on and things like that, and very heavily involved in budgeting and what have you.
And he did that deliberately?
I would think so.
Yeah.
And Terry Moore, when Terry had a very outstanding career in local government, and before the amalgamations, he was the CEO of the shire surrounding the Gold Coast, and he put in for Cairns and was appointed there. And Terry was a very, very astute operator, and particularly in negotiations and things like that, and he certainly was a very good delegator, but he made sure that everything was working and moving, and any concerns, he'd certainly pull you aside and have a chat to you and what have you. But I found the way in which he managed was and led was exceptional.
Yeah, awesome, good stories. Now, Bryan, what are the most significant changes that you have observed in local government throughout your tenure?
Probably the first major change, because things hadn't changed a lot for a while with the old Local Government Act of 1936. And I think the first major thing was the EARC legislation came along, which changed representation rules for elected members, because in Mulgrave Shire, for instance, they had divisions. For instance, at Babinda had 2 members, and Babinda's a little town in the southern area. Round Gordonvale, which was a fairly small town in those days, had 2 elected members. Edmonton, around that area, which was a bit larger in population, had 2 representatives on council. Then you go to the north and other areas 2, and then you went to the Northern Beaches, which was the biggest area, had 4 representatives. So when you worked out how much the population in each of those divisions, and it certainly didn't match up for equal representation, and that's what EARC was all about. So they changed the representation rules for elected members to ensure where the electoral divisions, that the quota of members per division are similar.
Yep.
And in Mulgrave case, they decided that Mulgrave had to go to the election with 1-member divisions.
Wow.
And that was a major change, and even in working out your divisions.
Yeah.
And we're lucky we had some very skilled staff at Mulgrave Shire with computers and that sort of thing, and we worked out those divisions reasonably well.
Yeah, wow. Never an easy task.
No, and then of course a major change to the Local Government Act was in 1993, and that's and some of the things that they did. As I mentioned, you used to have hold the local government clerk certificate to become a shire clerk in Queensland, so they abolished that. They brought in the term CEO was introduced into the Local Government Act. And prior to that, the mayors were, in most cases, were called chairman. So they changed the word chairman to mayor. And in cities like Cairns City Council, where the councillors were called aldermen, they were replaced by councillor. So changing cash accounting to accrual accounting was a fairly major thing, particularly for staff who'd never worked in that sort of manner. Another big thing I felt was the delegation of powers register and doing all that was a fairly rigorous process. And of course, the amalgamations of councils legislatively provided a lot of put angst and hard work on working out the following arrangements for it to happen.
Yeah, I imagine there would have been some inconsistencies between councils around that time.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and you can imagine, say, Mulgrave Shire and Cairns. Cairns was the city council and they had parking meters and all this, and Mulgrave Shire was a rural type council basically, but a lot of the development was happening, the housing development, of course, the development of the northern beaches and what have you.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic.
And, yeah.
All right, Bryan, we're going to move on to the highlight and lowlights. What's the one thing that sticks out in your mind as the highlight? And then equally, is there a worst moment in local government you can think of?
Yeah, probably the major highlight for me was that I had an excellent working relationship with the mayors at all councils where I was CEO, or Shire Clerk or CEO, and you wouldn't credit in the end, I became personal friends with those people thereafter. And I had some wonderful mayors that I worked with, Harry Rankin up at Herberton. And at the time, Harry was the mayor of the Shire. He was the chairman of directors of Malanda Milk. Malanda Milk was big in those days. He was the chairman of the Tableland Fire Brigade Board, and he was a member of the Cairns Harbour Board, which some years later became the Port Authority. And his term with that body was they made the decision to purchase the Cairns Airport from the Commonwealth Government.
Right, not insignificant.
And then, of course, Nanango was a very long-serving mayor down there called Reg McCallum. A lot of people, and at one stage he was the longest-serving mayor in Australia.
Right.
And at that time, in things, probably not the longest ever. And at Mulgrave Shire, we had Tom Pine. Tom Pine Tom had been president of the Local Government Association of Queensland during my time there, and a wonderful operator, a visionary actually, and I was fortunate in Nanango to have Peter Maguire, who I felt was an outstanding mayor, and of course a lot of the councillors there were fairly senior and very experienced. And for instance, Paul Bell, AM. And so I found working with them, but you had your own rules for what you could do and what they could do. But being in very close contact with them, the working relationship was very good. And in Emerald, for instance, and the Central Highlands, some people had run to the mayor obviously on staffing matters, so Peter would relay them to me to sort out, and similarly if I heard complaints on councillors, I'd relay them to him and he would look after that.
Good to know things haven't changed.
That sort of arrangement, yeah.
All right, excellent. That's highlight. That's very cool. Because nowadays there's a lot of political layers associated with those roles, but it sounds like you really just got to get down to business and not have to worry too much about politics.
Of course.
So
low lights, probably the two major ones in my case, I put in long hours, which impacted on my time with my wife and family, our work life. And probably one thing that's always worried me was having to investigate official complaints on councillors, which I believe should have been by an impartial body. the legislation may have changed on this since that time. I'm not sure, but once there's particularly a shire clerk got to investigate a complaint, and you tell the particular councillors that, and they want to know who's made the complaint and everything else, and they're the things that are very confidential, and you can't. And I believe that can break down, the councillor CEO relationship, and I always thought that was a worrying sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely worrying. Things have slightly changed at the moment. The Office of the Independent Assessor does a fair bit of the heavy lifting now, but there's still a requirement of the CEOs to do, in some cases, a little bit of triaging. But at least they don't have to now do the investigations like you did. That is a very awkward position to be in. So, all right, Bryan, as CEO, or even in any of your other roles, is there anything specific that worked for you that you can share?
I believe when I started, because one of the questions there that I looked at, the shire clerks in the older days were more authoritarian in their the way they operated, and I learnt very quickly that you had to become more of a people person. So I think being a people person helped me tremendously.
Yeah, that is brilliant advice.
Yeah.
I do feel though it comes a bit naturally to you, Bryan.
No.
No?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, I think so.
But I had to, as I said in my early days, I had to change quickly because you started off with the authoritarian,
sure,
and then you learnt quickly that that's not the way for the future.
Yeah, well, that's the next question actually. So, is that something, or is there anything else that you realised you had to change throughout your journey?
Yes, probably in the earlier days, and it might have been, it was probably a bad thing in some ways that you wanted to be hands-on in everything, so had to learn to delegate, and let people get on with it, and then make sure that people who you're delegated to, they delegate down the line to get everyone involved. So initially I was trying to do it all in a lot of cases.
Be a good delegator.
Yes.
What's the secret there? I think we all struggle with that a little bit.
Well, part of the secret, hopefully you've got good staff to delegate to in the
Sure.
in the beginning.
Yeah.
So have great staff and meet with them regularly and make sure that the things are being done. So things that I did particularly in Emerald and the Central Highlands was have regular, we called them senior management teams or leadership management team meetings, and make sure that the next level from them had meetings and they passed down to them, and it cascaded down to basically everybody.
Yeah, excellent.
And another big thing I found that worked for me was every morning I always did long hours, as I mentioned before. I'd go in early, and as the staff were arriving, I'd walk around the office and talk, because you could pick up if there was something, ailing somebody quickly. And I'd try and get out of the workshop. I didn't go as often as I should, and come sometimes out on the job to talk. But whenever there was a staff leaving, wherever, I'd make sure I attended all of those occasions, and including down at the workshop and what have you. And we introduced for the longer serving staff a special pottery mug to present to them on their leaving. And,
it wouldn't surprise me if that tradition is still alive at Central Highlands. It was when I was there.
Possible, yes. And the other thing that I used to, and they probably still do it now, did a monthly newsletter to all staff and encourage staff to make suggestions or changes they think should be made. And I do recall one at the time, one of the staff said, look, how about we get air-conditioned mowers. The little mowers, not the big tractors, they were air-conditioned, and I looked into it at the time, and a lot of the places that had them were having a lot of mechanical issues with them and everything, and I said, look, at the time I just said, no, we won't trial it yet because of this. However, keep it in abeyance, and I know they're running around all over the place these days.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was just one example. Things had come through, but I would feed back to all the question to this that I got. I wouldn't say it's from, but back to the staff in the next newsletter, and give them what the outcome of the question.
Yeah,
I felt that was important.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that concept of walking around sort of first thing in the morning and just getting a pressure on or gauge on what's happening.
Yes,
that sounds like a very insightful tactic. Our next question is, what was the most difficult part of your role? We've touched on a few of those, but is there anything that sort of immediately comes to mind?
Probably, even though I've mentioned a couple of times, probably the hardest things was the amalgamations. Now, I was very involved with the Cairns Mulgrave one, and after the amalgamation, of course, you got the them and us, the two councils, and then you've got to try and get the structures right, but the people part of it, and it takes long, and you'd find this them and us, and this is how we do it, and you tried not to. And for me, it was very hard because I came from one of the councils. You had to drop being a Mulgrave Shire ex-member, and you're now the new Cairns City Council member, and proceed ahead and try and get that culture, which takes years and years before it sort of starts. And I even think you need changes of councils before they really, the culture thing is sorted out properly. And of course, in Emerald, with the amalgamation of 4 councils, probably a bit harder in that regard, because you got more councils involved, and in this case, with the headquarters being in Emerald, which was the bigger town, the places like Springshaw, Blackwater, Juringa, Capella went from having all those senior people in offices and staff there to all of a sudden they're missing, they're gone, because you only have one CEO and one director of engineering and one, and so forth. And the other difficult part with that, of course, with the amalgamations is the appointment of your senior staff and managers. And the internal part of it, and if you didn't go internal, then you obviously external, but trying to. And in the case of the 4 councils coming together here, whilst you had 4 CEOs, well, you had myself as the CEO of the transition committee and 4 CEOs, and one of those decided he wanted to they were offered a package if they wanted to leave. That was through the regulation at the time, and one of the CEOs decided to leave, but the rest of them decided they wanted to stay. So then you had a as you know, and the other areas too, engineering, what have you, you've got all those people, you've got to try and fit into the organisation the best you can. And yes, so they were probably, and the other thing, particularly for Emerald, I'd been through cyclones and everything particularly up in far north Queensland, but the flooding, I'd never been through one of them. And in 2007, 2008, sorry, the flooding of Emerald itself, that was a big learning curve. And then, of course, in 10-11, around New Year's Day in 2011, when the dam peaked, that was a huge flood, but also got not only Emerald, a fair bit of the Shire, there were flooding and roads destroyed and everything. So the recovery process of the flooding it's a major thing and a major concern, and that was certainly big concerns in my regard.
Yeah, right.
In as your as a CEO.
Yeah, definitely. And that's certainly that the disasters are not reducing in frequency or severity.
No,
So I
no.
know that definitely a real issue for local government now. I'm curious, Bryan, when you're talking about the them and us from the amalgamations, do you feel as though there was even now we're 17 years on from amalgamations,
Oh
but
yes.
there's still conversations, more so in some councils than others, and I'm curious. At the time during your career, did you feel as though there was an indoor outdoor staff divide?
No, I didn't feel that. But what just going back to the Emerald situation, or the Central Highlands situation with the four councils. Soon as once the elections were done, you discovered you got four councils. Your wage structures of the four councils were all different. So, for instance, a labourer at one of the councils was getting a hell of a lot less in his classification than one at another. So,
Yeah,
one of the quickest things we had to do was the highest level. You had to bring everyone up to that level,
right.
and of course, some councils. So some of those labourers were getting fairly good increases in pay, and of course the ones who were on the higher level, they could see they were getting nothing. And then we had the EBA. We had to do an EBA basically straight away. Um, so the staff that were at the higher end before the amalgamation, they weren't real happy after the EBA came through, because the staff on the lowers got an increase to bring them up to their level, plus say it was a 3%, I can't remember, was it on top of that. So I had to manage that a little bit at the time too. So
Yeah, right. Never ending.
as you can imagine.
Yeah. All right, Bryan. The next question is: you've represented LGMA or IMM members on the board for many years. What
Yes.
made you put your hand up for these roles, and what was your experience contributing to the boards?
Okay, well, I was elected to the state board of IMM in 1988, basically to learn from very experienced members and to assist in finding ways to improve the organisation for members. Where I initially saw the benefits when I joined, or before I joined IMA, which it was back in the earlier days, Institute of Municipal Administration, every time the Shire Clerk Bill Mills in Atherton had come back from a conference, an NQ or whatever, he'd bring something that he'd learnt from someone else and want us to implement it. And I thought, gee, that's a good organisation. He's bringing all this new stuff in, and and probably another example was, I think it was 1976. Back in those days, not many councils had computers, and we had electronic accounting machines and what have you. And he came back from one of these things and he says, "Oh, Cairns City Council's computerised and they've got the staff running the show there. They've offered us, if we're prepared to go there, to do our payroll and plant hire electronically, do it for us, save us having to go through it all. And what we'd have to do is take the timesheets and what have you down there, say the morning of the day, they'd punch them in and print all the print out on the same day." And anyway, decided to go that way. And that was another example from there. So joining the IMM once, when I became a Shire clerk, that was one of the first things I wanted to do. And then joining the state board was to go in and try and, with the knowledge of these very experienced people who are on the board, learn from them, and plus look at ways of implementing things that made things easier. And back in those days, we only we had a part-time secretary, and in my time was a fellow called Ed Kalinsky, and he was an officer at Brisbane City Council.
Right.
And so it was a part-time role.
Yeah.
So he still had his job there. And of course, as years went by, when I finished on the board in 2003, we had one staff member and CEO being the CEO at the time, Tony Wheelow. But getting back to the question, back then, the board used to coordinate your state conferences. And because when I mentioned we had a part-time secretary, so some of the board members were involved in that. And one of the big conferences I was involved with was in the early 90s. It was decided to hold the IMM state and national conferences together, sponsored by Mulgrave Shire and Cairns City Council.
Wow.
That was in my early years at Mulgrave Shire. So Bill Mills appointed me the coordinator from Mulgrave, and Cairns City appointed a lady from over there. And we basically had to coordinate the venue, look after the accommodation, all of the social part of the conference. And
how big was Mulgrave Council? How many staff?
Mulgrave, back then, they would have, it was a fairly big council, similar to Cairns City Council at the time. They would have had close to 300 staff.
Okay, yeah.
It was a fairly big council, yeah. And anyway, so we had to look after the social side, things like name tags, all of the social activities. And back in those days, the state conferences went for 5 full days. So the people would fly in on the weekend, and you'd have an inspection day. So that particular conference, the inspection day was on the Wednesday, and it was a trip to the reef.
Okay.
An inspection of the reef and what have you. But you had to organise all that stuff. But members of the state board, and back at that one, the state president at the time was Stan Fersman, who was the CEO of Mackay City Council at that time, and Stan would have, with some other members, coordinated the speakers and the topics. But as the host councils, we also had to chase the sponsors. But we're lucky. Probably like now, I'm assuming you got the same sponsors come on board all of the time. And back in those days, some of those sponsors were with you, are still with us now, but places that computer organisations were big sponsors in those days. And one of our major sponsors back then was a fellow, was called Wandek Computing. Wandek, you're probably before your time.
Yep.
And at that time, Jeff Redmond, who you'd know from Redmond Solutions, Jeff worked for Wandek.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah, that's where I first ran into Jeff a long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so you had to coordinate them and what have you, and that was a fairly big task, because now, of course, now you've got the staff there with LGMA, and then that later, that just after the amalgamations, LGMA wanted. Was still IMM, wanted us to run the state conference in Cairns, and so we coordinated that in a similar manner. And it was just at that time, about that time, when we appointed Tony Wheelow to the role as full time. Yeah. So they were the same things. Now, one thing Bill Mills did back then, and I used to go to all the meetings with him because I was at Mulgrave. When I first went there, he was the state president and I was on the board, the state board. And he went and some of the sponsors of the state conferences, BT Australia was one of them, the banking group, and the Commonwealth Bank. And Bill got to know the bigwigs in there, and he was responsible for setting up that trust that I think LGMA still has for special projects.
Right.
Yeah. So, and Bill, part of the arrangements to get this money out of them, he used to invest. We used to put term deposits from Mulgrave Shire with them, and I think that helped him in his negotiation style of setting up that trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so
We got a lot to thank Bill for then.
yeah, but also being on the board, you get to know all the sponsors and all those people, and of course your individual board members, and you learn from each other and become mates with them as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. So, Bryan, if there is one thing, what is the best thing about having a local government career?
Well, of course, I loved the career with the opportunity for diversity and opportunity. For me, was the interaction with the staff and councillors, and the people who count, including the public. And I think that was probably the highlight for me.
Yep.
And from that, of course, from the position of CEO and LGMA, you made some great friends and acquaintances, some of whom I keep in contact today. And for instance, on that, at the state conference, which I was the president, the LGMA National sent a vice president to it, a fellow called Lindsay Delahunty, and Lindsay and I become great mates since that conference, and keep in contact with each other. He's in Western Australia, Lindsay.
Okay. That's excellent.
He's long time retired.
We've spoken about a lot of changes though, but our next question is, has it changed local government?
Well, I believe the legislative changes made to local government acting regs has made it harder, particularly for senior and junior management, and probably interaction with councillors. However, I've been away from the coalface to really make a valid comment on that. But I know that councils have got to communicate a lot better than, and really ramp it up these days, because the communities these days are they want to know what's happening and they want to be informed. And I think that's a big area that, that's really put a focus on local government. But you'd be more aware of all the changes that been made since my time.
Well, I'm curious. Do you think during your career the communication of the councils that you worked at, did you see ones that did it really well, and did you experience ones that didn't? We're in a different age with the whole social media at the moment, and that drives a lot of I think unrest and incivility. But yeah, I'm very keen to learn about how did you guys communicate with the community and the other stakeholders at the time?
Yeah, well, back in the Central Highlands, of course, we because that was the age of the social media coming in, and then we had to start working on that. And of course, a lot of people in the early stages aren't on social media, so putting out quarterly newsletters back then. The mayor getting on the radio a fair bit.
Yeah.
And probably interaction with people, and the big thing that there was setting up your community consultative committees, which, and having at least one a year in all the different areas of the giant, and there were quite a a lot of those areas in this council area, and with the size of the amalgamated council.
Yeah.
And that was probably the focus then. But I think now councils rely a lot more on the social media side, and there's still, of course, there's still a lot of the public who probably aren't that way inclined. So you often wonder where they get their communications from. And of course, when rate notices and things go out, they've always got lots of information going out with them and what have you. Whether people read them or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's no one knows the real answer to that.
Yeah.
The next one, Bryan, possibly the most important question that we're going to ask is any advice to newcomers or prospective and aspiring local government CEOs?
Probably from my time, when things were a lot different. I would have said initially, get your qualifications, get your learning, even move from council to council. You might be in a big council where the opportunities mightn't be there for you to move much, and try and encourage to go to a smaller council somewhere. And I know some people have gone from large councils where they didn't have an opportunity. They've gone into a little council, probably ended up deputy or even CEO, and then they've moved on and found the place that they wanted to go. But certainly, I believe the experience, particularly the bigger councils, but even the little councils. In my case, I see I need to build up to get into the bigger council and get that experience. And of course, joining the association, LGMA is certainly, and I've noticed in recent times that the courses and the training that's put out there is all really first class stuff. But didn't have that in my days, of course, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's, in my view, is not staying. And I've noticed quite a few CEO appointments have come from probably middle management of Brisbane City Council. So those people probably think, I can't move. And some of them have taken up some fairly big positions. And but you'd probably see more of it than I do these days.
Well, Bryan, I'm taking away from that. Be prepared to move and make sure you're an LGMA member.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Exactly right.
No, that's brilliant. Bryan, technically, that is all of the formal questions we have for the oral history project. But is there anything you feel as though you want to just add on to the learnings?
Probably one of the things in the career, in which I think, from what I'd learned, for instance, at Atherton Shire, believe it or not, was back in those early days, was a fairly progressive shire, and they were one of the first councils to bring a town plan in.
Right.
And they had this professional they had a consultant town planner from Townsville who used to come up. And so I had the opportunity to learn town planning there. So when I went with my very wet feet to Herberton Shire, they'd brought in a town plan using consultants to bring it in, and the staff weren't engaged in it. So that was a learning curve, but also lucky that I could try and pass that on to staff there. But also from the experience, the experience of Atherton Shire, the subdivision of land bylaws in Herberton Shire were very, very basic. And back in those days, So probably my first meeting there, council passed this subdivision where they didn't require the applicant could cut this block into 5, but didn't have to put in driveways or roads or nothing towards the roads and accesses in. And I sort of jumped up and down, and one of the councillors sort of took me to task a bit. Anyway, that went away, and about 3 meetings later, this councillor says, at the council meeting, I can see where the Shire clerk was coming from. He says all those the new owners of these 5 blocks all want council to give them accesses and things like that. So that gave you the opportunity to revise and bring in modern subdivision of land bylaws and what have you. And that was just part of the experience process.
Yeah, fantastic. Bryan, what do you enjoy doing now?
Right, so I had to give more time to, even though my daughters and families aren't here with us, but visiting them, of course, and keeping in contact with them. A lot of overseas travel, particularly with friends. So sometimes here groups of, initially my first travel from here while I was working, there was a group of 40 from this area, did the Rockies and a cruise to the Inside Passage to Alaska. That's just an example, but we love overseas, particularly traveling with friends.
Yeah.
Where
was your most recent trip?
Most recent, the year before last, we did with another couple from here, and he was a Vietnam veteran. We did Gallipoli. My grandfather on my mother's side was an Anzac, so we did Gallipoli, the Western Front, and then we went over to Thailand and because this other couple, he does a lot of business over there, and he took us up to the railway there, and so that was a great trip. The trip we've got planned for this year in October, and I've done it before, is we're flying into Prague, and then for 3 days, and then we just after that we're commencing that river cruise from Budapest to Amsterdam.
Oh wow, half your luck.
Yeah. So
have you rubbed the dog on the Charles's Bridge? Have you heard that story?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
but that's a new one. But
fortunate
the other
to be
things,
in Prague. You'll have to check that out.
Yeah. The other things, I've been a member of the Lions organisation for 43 years. Yep. Prior to that, I was in JC's for 13 years. Yep. And I was commissioned, when I started in the workforce, I joined the CMF, or Army Reservists, they were called in those days, and back in the National Service days, and 51st Battalion put me through an officer school, and I become an officer. So I was a platoon commander there. I was in the CMF for 10 years, and I achieved the rank of captain, before I retired. So that's leading into just after I came in 2001, I was encouraged to join the RSL sub branch here, and then they rocketed me into vice president for some years, and then in 2014 no one had taken on secretary, so I've been secretary since then. That takes up a lot of my time, I can tell you.
Yeah, wow.
Because
can't stop contributing to the community, Bryan.
Yeah. See, the RSL's tied up with ACNC, and we're also a charity, so the paperwork and everything involved with it is fairly extensive.
Yeah. And I imagine the rest of the members just conveniently look to you from all of your skills and experience, right? That's awesome.
And the other thing, of course, is catching up with, made a lot of friends over the years, so catching up with them and locally. And when I go to Brisbane to visit the daughter there, I catch up with ex-Atherton mates, but also I did my secondary education as a boarder at Brisbane Boys College, BBC in Brisbane. So I catch up with mates from there, the ones who live around Brisbane.
Geez, I think
fairly regularly.
we'll have to do another oral history project just on your life, Bryan, not just the local government part. That's extraordinary. We might have been what would I say? Competitors. I was a Brisbane State High boy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so no, that's good. That's some extraordinary storytelling, and it's been a privilege to spend this time with you, Bryan. Thank you very much for taking the time out to give us all of your, well, not all of them, certainly not, but some of them, some of those lessons from your local government career.
Yeah, no, thank you. And